Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a little bit of in the fourth Midah, in the Talmud Devorah, Parak Aleph of the Talmud Devorah. So it was Sheiris Nachalaso, the remnant of his inheritance, which the Ramak interprets to mean She'er is a lashon of korva, a lashon of relationship, of connection, that Hashem's feeling towards Am Yisrael is like a father, a parent to a child, like a brother to a sister, and even like a child to a parent, all of these different relationships, husband to wife. So I mentioned I wanted to clarify something that I had left hanging, and that is he points out to the pasuk in Yeshayahu, B'chol tzarasam lo tzar, in all of their sufferings, he suffers. So I want to explain something that I left hanging. The Ramak points out there is a kesiv and there's a kri. The kesiv, the way the word is written, is b'chol tzarasam lo tzor. Lo is lamed aleph, which literally means in all of their suffering, he does not suffer. The question, what would the point of that be? We'll get to that. And then the kesiv, the kri, the way you read it, same pronunciation, but as if it's a different spelling. B'chol tzarasam lo tzor. In all of their suffering is Hashem's suffering. So the Kri is making the obvious point that God suffers in all of our suffering because essentially it is as if it's God's child or God's spouse, God's sibling, Kaviyachal, that is going through all of these sufferings. What the Talmud Devorah wants to be masber was, however, that this meaning emerges not only from the Kri, which it obviously does, but it even emerges from the kesiv. So I think I did not explain it properly. It's based on the idea that the highest level of God's divine presence is identified as Pele. Pele is Pei Lamed Aleph. Pele actually is an interesting double word in and of itself. The word Pele means wonder, that which is wondrous. But the word Pele, and the truth is it's connected, also means that which is covered up. Right? God, for example, Chazal say, "B'mufla mimcha al tidrosh." Do not seek the meaning of things that are covered up for you, that are beyond you. In fact, it's interesting. The Ramban, just as a little aside, the Ramban was one of the first meforshim of the Rishonim who introduced Kabbalah in his parish. And he even gives you a signal when he says, Al derech ha'emes. That's always the signal for Kabbalah. And you'll notice that the art scroll, which is translated the Ramban, does not translate the Al derech ha'emes thing. So the Ramban writes in the Hakdama that he is going to signal his use of Kabbalah with Al derech ha'emes. So if you're not on the Madrega, you should know to skip it. The Ramban himself instructs you to skip it, and he quotes at the end of his Hakdama the Maimer Chazal, "B'mufla mimcha al tidrosh." Do not seek things that are beyond you. Or it says in Parsha Shoftim, "Ki yipalei mimcha davor la mishpat." When something is beyond you, it's mechusa. So you go to the Sanhedrin for clarification. So Pele, the truth is, it's connected because that which is wondrous, that which is miraculous, is beyond my understanding of how it happened. So the idea that Pele means both wonder and that which is elusive and covered up and beyond me is a common meaning. Now, what's a little difficult grammatically or etymologically is that there's a third meaning of Yipaleh, and that is to articulate. It says by Nedarim, ki yafli, when you articulate a vow. And in fact, based on that, hafla'ah is used to mean to clearly enunciate and express something. So here you have an interesting example where a single shorish is used both for two opposite meanings. Lahafli means to cover up, or to something which is wondrous, and asher yatzar, mafli lasos, God does wonders. It also means to verbalize and articulate, and to kind of uncover, because what does speech do? Speech uncovers that which was otherwise covered up in your mind, right? I have a thought, you don't know what I'm thinking. I articulate it, I'm uncovering the thought. This phenomenon, I don't want to digress too much in biblical Hebrew, but this phenomenon that a verb can have quite literally opposite meanings is not uncommon. Lahashrish but means both to root something in the ground, and to uproot something in the ground. The same verb, lahashrish. Lahakor only means to uproot. Lahashrish can mean either to root something or to uproot something. Why a single verb can have opposite meanings, I honestly don't know. But then you have different things. Arum, naked. Arum means naked. Arum means deceptive. Arum means cunning and wise, even in positive ways. In the book of Mishlei, when it talks about Orma, sometimes it means deceit, and sometimes it means wisdom. Maybe because wisdom allows you to see through deceit and connect to Orma. Okay, be it as it may, the highest madrega of God is called Pella, because it is mechuseh from us. It is beyond our comprehension. So, the highest level of Pella is Aleph. Aleph is the last letter in Pella. So it's as if you're going up to God by this ladder. So you're going to eventually hit the Pei level, the Lamed level, the Aleph level. Because Aleph is the last letter of Pella. So listen how the Ramak ingeniously interprets. B'chal tzarasam lo tzor, Lamed Aleph. So I'm correcting what I said. I did not say it correctly the other day. Lo tzor means to the level of Aleph it reaches, the suffering reaches. In all of their suffering, lo meaning la Aleph, it reaches all the way to the highest level of God's throne. You see how he's interpreting it? So Lamed Aleph in his pshat does not mean no, but it's a preposition followed by a proper noun, or at least a letter. Lo means la Aleph. It reaches all the way to the Aleph, meaning it reaches the highest level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Aleph, which is the end letter of the word Pella. Right? Pella is the highest level, and Aleph is the highest level within Pella, because it's the last letter. Now, similarly, he actually does the same thing with the Kri, although it's not necessary. I mean, the Kri says explicitly, in all of their suffering, he suffers. But Kabbalistically, he interprets it the same way. If lo with an Aleph meant, in all of the suffering, it reaches to the Aleph, so lo with the Vav means it reaches to the Vav, it reaches to the 6. What does it mean it reaches to the 6? So again, below the level of Pella, which is the highest level, the Ein Sof, we have the level of the Spheros, the various emanations. And remember there are 10 Spheros, but the highest 3 are Keser, Chachma, Bina. The lower 6 are the Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and they unite with the 7th, which is Malchus. We talked about this, but we'll come back to it again. So what it's basically saying, according to the Ramak, this is a Kabbalistic explanation, that God feels our pain at the highest level, all the way to the Aleph of Pella, and Kal V'chomer to the lower level of the 6 Spheros, which are more connected to this earth, right? So he's learning the Lamed is a preposition. Lo is to the Aleph. The Tzara, the pain of God, reaches to the Aleph, and Kal V'chomer, it reaches to the world of the Spheros, which are the 6 basic Spheros that interact with Malchus on earth, which is called the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the Malchus, and in ways we don't really get, the Shefa of God comes into the world when you have the unification of the 6 Spheros and Malchus. If you remember, just to go over that, I think we went over it briefly, and we'll come back to it, and none of us really understand what any of this is, but you'll remember Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Shem Hamaforish. So the kutzo shel yud, the little point above the yud, represents keser, the crown, the highest sphira. The yud represents chokhmah. The hey represents bina. The vav represents the 6 lower spheros. And the second hey represents malchus, God uniting. And when we say l'shem yichud, right? Again, actually, what I'm doing here, maybe I shouldn't be doing, but I'm really following an eitzah of Rav Chaim Volozhiner. Rav Chaim Volozhiner writes that although most of us are not on the madrega to really understand Kabbalah, but he felt that there was an inyan that one should be familiar with some of the terminologies. So even though we don't know exactly what it means, but just to have a little bit of a sense of the language. So the lower 6 spheros are called kudsha barichu. And the 7th sphera, which is the 10th one, malchus, is called shekhinah. So when you say, l'shem yichud, I want to unite, kudsha barichu u'shechintei, I want the 6 spheros to unite with malchus to produce a divine shefa. Now, all I will say now is that this is mainstream Kabbalah. This is actually simple Kabbalah. But there were those who really considered this to be very, very problematical. Because if it's axiomatic in Judaism that God is one and God is not divisible, then how can you talk about God being united with another part of God? That the Kodsha Barichu should be united with the Shekhinah. We don't believe in trinities and we don't believe in binaries. Right? We believe in Achdus HaPashat, that God is an indivisible unit. And yet the whole language of Kabbalah is about unification of different halakim. So there were those who took the position. I know that it's common in the yeshiva world. People say, oh, if you don't believe in Kabbalah, you're an apikoros. Okay. There are those who took the position, if you believe in Kabbalah, you're an apikoros, because you're introducing duality or multiplicity within the unity of God. So what do the Mekubalim say? The Mekubalim say, no, none of this is understood literally. This is figuratively. This is a mashal. Chas v'shalom, God is one. There is no multiplicity. It is only a mashal. The question is, a mashal for what? Right? That's the problem. It's a mashal, meaning you're describing something as if this is happening, but it's not actually happening. So what is happening? Big problem. Okay, so I'm not here to answer anything, but just to familiarize ourselves a little bit with the language. So as a result, the symbolic meaning of the letter Vav are the lower 6 spheros that are mashpia in the world through their unification with Malchus, that is called Shekhinah. So the Ramak is interpreting both the Kri and the Ksiv of B'chal Tzarasam Lo Tsar to refer to God feeling with empathy and pain the suffering of the Jewish people. That's the Yesod. And it reaches all the way to the highest level of Aleph, down to the lower level of the 6 spheros. And that is the meaning of the Kri and the Kisiv. Okay? So that I think I may have misstated it the other day. Okay, so that is the 4th Midah of L'She'eris Nachalaso. And just 1 second here. And how you remember, there's going to be 2 parts to everything, right? In every midah, there's 2 parts. Number 1, what is Hashem's midah? And number 2, how do I emulate Hashem's midah in order to trigger it down? So Hashem's midah is, he looks at every Jew as a family in all of these relationships. We're a spouse, we're a child, we're a parent, we're a sibling. All of the elements of love in those relationships are present in our relationship to Hashem. And the way we apply it in our own emulation is that indeed I should look at every person who hurts me as a member of my family. So my son hurt me, but he's still my son. My wife hurt me, he's still my wife. My parent, I love them, I care about them. That's not going to cancel out the love. They'll be hurt and there'll be pain, but they are my family, and therefore I look at them in a different way. Now, I mentioned before that the Talmud Devorah goes on and discusses the idea that the unification of the Jewish people to each Jew is not simply family, but it literally means intermingling, that each one of us has a chelik of everybody else, and that's why we have the idea of Kol Yisrael HaRaven Zel Lezeh. Each person is responsible for every other person. I could make Kiddush for you, etc., because if you didn't hear Kiddush, my own neshama that is within you, part of which is within you, has not become misukan. So based on this, he brings a Gemara in Brachos that's very, very interesting. The Gemara in Brachos talks about a special zechus to be of the Asara Rishainim Bebeis HaKnesses, right? I'm sure you've learned this. To be among the first 10, to make the minyan, to be the first 10. So the language of the Gemara in Brachos is that if you are among the first 10 who come to the Beis Knesses, afilu meya ba'im HaRav, even if 100 people show up afterwards, but if you're among the first 10, you will get sechar kineged kulam, meaning the sechar of the Asara Rishainim will be equal or greater than all of the other, meaning what it seems to say is, any one of the 10 will get a sechar that is equal to all of the people who come afterwards. Okay, so if we have 100 people, so I get the sechar of those 100 people, and every one of the 10 gets the sechar of those 100 people. Now I know people always raise questions, it's not so clear exactly. What if you're number 8, but you have to go to the bathroom, and after you go to the bathroom, 3 other people show up? Like, do you forfeit your position by momentary absence because somebody else took your place? That's an interesting question exactly. But l'chayra, if you actually were of the first 10, you're given that status, even if you had to walk out. But the Ramak is medayek the following. So what does the Gemara say? If you are of the Asara Rishainim, afilu ba'u meya makabel sechar keneged kulam. So why does the Gemara use the example of 100? Why doesn't it say 1,000? Like, why does it use B'dafka 100? So his point is there's a remez here. The remez is that when you have 10 people, you actually have 100 neshamos in a group of 10. And the reason is because each person contains the neshamos of every other person. Now, there'll be a kasha on this, but let me just say what he says. So, if we have 10 people in shul, my neshama comprises 10, myself and the other 9. Your neshama comprises 10, yourself and the other 9. So it turns out that every group of 10 who are coming to be Ovdei Hashem is comprised of 100. Because each one contains chalokim of the neshamos of the other. And that's why those 10 people will be rewarded with the sechar of 100. Meaning, I'm not sure what the Ramak's ultimate conclusion here is. So that means if 1,000 people show up, I don't get the sechar. In other words, the Asara Rishainim only get the sechar of Meya, but not beyond Meya. But the thing I don't get really is, l'chayra, the Ramak's overall idea was that in each neshama is kailel all of the neshamas of Am Yisrael. It's not, if I'm with 10 people, it's not just, I'm with 9 other people. It's not just I have the neshamas of those 9 people. I have the neshamas of 600,000 people all the time. In other words, what is this? This seems to be a new way of counting, that you're only counting the neshamas of the people with whom you're doing the mitzvah. And I'm not sure how that fits in. I mean, if you're going to tell me that every single neshama is nichlal in every other neshama, that's not going to give you a number of 100. That's going to give you a number of whatever millions of people there are, or 600,000, let's say, base neshamas and the like. So I'm not entirely sure how this cheshbon works, but at least he is using this idea of the inclusion of the multiple neshamas to explain that in a group of 10 people doing a mitzvah, it's kilo, there's 100 people doing a mitzvah, because each neshama is nichlal. Well, actually, now that I'm speaking about it, maybe we understand this. Yeah, every neshama includes every other neshama. But the neshamas that are not doing the mitzvah are not activated. They're like dormant DNA. But if the pshat is, you and I are doing a mitzvah, so then the pshat is, my essence gets activated, your essence gets activated, and your essence in me gets activated, and my essence in you gets activated. Like imagine the light. In other words, there may be millions and millions and millions of fragments of neshamas in me, but the only one that gets lit up is me and you. So actually that makes sense. So it turns out, if we have 10 people doing a mitzvah together, so it turns out in each neshama there will be 10 light bulbs that will be turning on. Meaning, my light bulb turns on because I'm doing a mitzvah, and your light bulb turns on in me because you're doing the mitzvah, and vice versa with me. All right, so that's how you get the cheshbon. So it turns out that when 10 people are doing a mitzvah, there are 100 light bulbs that are turning on, connecting to God. Now it's true that my neshama includes all of those neshamas, but they're not being activated because those chalakim are not doing the Maaseh HaMitzvah, right? So this is the notion of interdependence of souls, in which every neshama is kolel every other neshama, and therefore that explains why I can make kiddush for you, because there's a chelik of my neshama that didn't have its tikkun if you did not do the mitzvah. Yeah.
So why can't it be more than 100? Meaning, what if, is it because the 10 people is its own mitzvah?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. He says that 10 people have kind of turned on 100 lights, and that's why they have the schar of the 100 that come afterwards. More than that, again, I don't know if the Ramak is drawing a conclusion that more than that wouldn't be, but you get your naitel sechar kulam. Okay, so that's the midah of l'she'eris nachalasai, and he explains that just as Hashem suffers when his family suffers humiliation or pain, we should suffer when someone else is suffering humiliation or pain. It should be our own suffering. So instead of inflicting that suffering, it's the other way around. We should feel a pain when someone is suffering. You know, people, I'm sure you've heard the story, a famous Shalom Bayis story, that when Rav Aryeh Levin would take his Rebbetzin to the doctor, so he would always, she had her foot was hurting, it's a famous story, he would say, our foot is hurting. Our foot is hurting. It's mamish, it was mamish his pain. You know, they tell another story about Shalom Bayis. Rav Aryeh's wife, you know, Rav Aryeh Levin was Rav Elyashiv's son-in-law, father-in-law. Rav Aryeh Levin, the great, he was known as the great tzaddik of Yerushalayim. There's a beautiful book in English, a tzaddik in our time, that you can read about Rav Aryeh Levin. So they tell a story that a life insurance salesman was once trying to sell him a life insurance policy. And he didn't want to buy it, he couldn't afford it. So he finally told the life insurance salesman, I don't want to buy it because I feel I have a greater segula to stay alive longer if I don't have life insurance. What's the pshat? Because he held, in his modesty, that every Rosh Hashanah he didn't have a zechus to deserve to live another year. But his wife, Rebbetzin Chana, was such a tzaddikas that he stays alive in her merits. So he said, let's imagine the Kisei HaKavod. Let's imagine the Yom Adin on Rosh Hashanah. He says, the Midas Adin says, Rav Aryeh doesn't deserve to live. But the Midas HaRachamim says, Rebbetzin Chana needs him. And Baruch Hashem, that's how I come out. Now let's imagine I buy life insurance. So what's going to happen? The Midas Adin says, I don't deserve to live. The Midas HaRachamim says, Rebbetzin Chana needs him. The Midas Adin says, no, she doesn't. He has life insurance. So he said, listen, he says, I feel I can have a more favorable din on Rosh Hashanah if I don't have life insurance. Now again, this is not halacha l'maisa. Rav Moshe has a tshuva that life insurance is a proper hishtadlus, but it's an interesting hashkafa that he held that his whole zechus kiyum was because of his rebbetzin. She actually was a very, very meforsam tzaddikas. Yeah.
The concept of we say God's suffering is for us to understand, just to relate to. Like, was there a deeper notion to that, or?
Well, again, the idea of God's suffering is a very. On one hand, it's a simple idea. On the other hand, theologically, it's a complex idea. The Ramban portrays God as not having emotions, not having feelings. That God is totally perfect. So for God to change different moods, I'm sad, I'm happy, that's not consistent with the perfection and the unity of the Almighty. So the Rambam did paint the picture of God as not having emotion or feeling, and even descriptions of Hashem having mercy are not feelings of mercy, they're actions of mercy. On the other hand, let me just say that the Lashon of the Torah itself, Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesuvim, certainly portrays emotion, feeling, and the Mekubalim also talk that way. So, you have to be miyashav exactly what that fully means. But the notion of God not having feelings, not having passions, not having emotion is not the way the Torah talks. It's not the way Chazal speak. It's not the way the Mekubalim speak. So, in a sense, we have the picture of God that is drawn by the philosophers, including the Rambam, which is a very impersonal, distant, and cold picture, actually, even though it's based on rationality, is very, very different than the description, at least the description of Hashem in Tanakh and in Midrashim and in Chazal, where there's a great deal of feeling. So the way the Mekubalim try to answer it, although I'm not sure if the Ramak would fit here, is they differentiate between the Ein Sof, the inscrutable essence of God, and the manifestations of divinity in the world of the Spheros. In the world of Spheros, there's passion and feeling. On the level of the Ein Sof, there is nothing we can describe. So that's, even though you go from the frying pan to the fire, because you're giving a place for emotion at the expense of multiplicity. So you're going to have a problem either way. But that's why the Mekubalim kind of developed the notion of the Sviros as a separate thing from the Ein Sof. On the other hand, if the Ramak says Hashem feels the pain all the way to the level of the Aleph, which is the highest level, that seems to indicate it penetrates even up there. So there's a lot that we don't understand. I'll admit to you, but certainly Talmud Devorah is based on Hashem feeling the pain of the Jewish people. Yeah.
Just to try to reconcile some of those different things. As an example, if you have a pot of water and you turn up the heat a little bit and it becomes hot, or water is cold, it's still water. It hasn't changed in terms of its element, but you could say that's like the hot and the cold. Is that a way to kind of reconcile the emotions while not changing the actual state of Hashem? Nothing's changed.
Yeah, I understand, but you're still, but even so, the water is influenced by the heat. In other words, there's still this notion of something influencing, which the Rambam might consider that to be foreign to the perfection and the unity of Hashem. So once again, I mean, the short answer I could give you, which would be not rational by human comprehension, is that in the element of infinity, contradictions can exist. I mean, that's the interesting problem. When something, infinity, there may be contradictions, because infinity can encompass an infinite range of possibilities. So, in an infinite God, there can be both emotion and lack of emotion at the same time. This makes sense. No, it makes no sense rationally. And I'm not sure the Rambam would agree to this, because, the Rambam has a very interesting philosophical view about the nature of God, and that is, even God himself is subject to the laws of contradiction. In other words, God cannot embrace opposites. God cannot be not God, etc. God cannot, okay, maybe cannot is not the right word, but can God make a square circle? Can God make a four-sided triangle? The Rambam would say no, because that's incoherent. That even divinity is subject to what we call logical impossibility. Not factual impossibility, meaning, could God lift, 1,000,000 tons? Yeah, because that's not a logical impossibility. That's just a physical limitation. God has no physical limitations. So the Rambam would differentiate between a statement, God can lift 1,000,000,000 tons, versus a statement, God can make a four-sided triangle. The Rambam would answer yes to the first sentence, and he would answer no to the second sentence. You see the difference. One is simply a power limitation. The other is a logical impossibility. And it is the Rambam's shita that God is subject, so to speak, to logical impossibility. In fact, this would be an answer to a lot of famous questions. Could God kill himself? Could God have a body? Now, one argument is, if God could do anything, why can't God kill himself? You're telling me God is limited? Or, why can't God have a body if he wants to? So the Rambam would answer that under the law of contradiction, the one thing God cannot do is not be God. And since the definition of God is no body and eternal, or at least that's the attributes of God, so God cannot have a body and God cannot be not eternal, because then God would be not God. This is called, again, the truth of the matter is, this is actually based on Aristotle, but the Rambam is using Aristotelian logic to create what is called by Aristotle, in Greek, of course, the law of non-contradiction. And the Rambam's opinion is that God is bound by the law of non-contradiction. Now, in Chassidus and in Kabbalah, that actually is not accepted. It says, hey, God can do anything, including contradict. So God can make a four-sided triangle. Could God have a body? Okay, how far would you take that? I don't know. But the notion about emotion that I was suggesting a moment ago, that in the world of infinity, you can embrace contradiction. That may be true according to the Mekubalim. That may not be true according to the Rambam. I think according to the Rambam, that answer wouldn't be an answer. In other words, I'm just addressing just thoughts, random thoughts about the notion, does God have emotions? The Rambam says no. Kabbalah says yes. But in the world of Kabbalah, you can live with contradictions. So both statements can be true. According to the Rambam, l'chara, both statements cannot be true, because you can't live God is bound by the law of non-contradiction. So it's a very, very difficult problem. But all I can say is that the Torah certainly is communicating a message that God has feelings. Because what does Hashem want us to relate to the Creator? We relate to a God that feels our pain, and that is the meaning of she'erit nachalaso. Okay? So again, I apologize if much of this is not understandable, but once again, I share your confusion and your lack of understanding, so I'm in no better of a boat, but at least to get a sense of the terminology, it's a worthwhile thing to be familiar with a little bit. And as I say, once you have the concepts in your head, so over time, you think about them, over time, they mature a little bit, and you advance la'at la'at in getting a better understanding once the seeds are planted. So it's kedai sometimes to be exposed even to things we don't understand, because they are seeds that might germinate a little later on in a deeper, more sophisticated understanding. Okay, we'll stop here.